Things are unfortunately at an all-time low when it comes to the New Orleans Saints, and it's all capped off with another hapless loss against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Can they get it right? We're going to break it all down. We got all that and a little bit of lanyard for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into this live Postcast episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much, as always, for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, we're free and available on all podcast apps and on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credential member of the media, CrescentCitySports.com, USA Today's Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday, and then some on Locked On Saints. And we are here for our live postcast episode to break this all down for you. I'm going to pick some of the names I'm seeing in the chat right now, some of the words I'm seeing in the chat. Buckle right now says poor. He also says horrible. He also says horrible again. And somebody said, and you know it, Ross. We got Tyler, we got Jerry, we got Mr. Jerry up in here. We got a lot of folks that are here. We got a lot of them that are going to sound off here all throughout. And as far as I'm concerned, sound off chat, because this New Orleans Saints team is nowhere near the New Orleans Saints team that you expected, nowhere near the New Orleans Saints team that you were promised coming into this season. So much optimism, so much positivity with all of the offseason moves, with the change at head coach being one that we thought would be one that maybe wasn't as detrimental, with a team that wasn't at all in sort of disarray or anything like that. You have a familiar face that was stepping in, all that, the continuity play, all those things. And instead, what you have gotten is exactly what you saw up against the Pittsburgh Steelers. New Orleans Saints dropping this one 20-10. The only thing saving the score for them was a well-executed 2-minute drive at the end of the first half, but then two second-half interceptions, one of which that bounced out of the hand of Jarvis Landry, another one that Kevin White was just simply outfought for over on the right sideline. So all of the things that the New Orleans Saints said that they were going to put in Andy Dalton's hands, and the reason why they were rolling forward with him as their starter, you're seeing the exact opposite so far over the course of the last few games. So that's where we're going to start here today. We're going to discuss this, and then we're going to kind of tell the truth here when it comes to Dennis Allen and the New Orleans Saints and what that relationship is moving forward. When you look at what Andy Dalton and what you were promised with Andy Dalton, you were promised a better offense, one that was a top 5, top 10 in different metrics, right? Major passing metrics, major total offensive metrics, all those other things. But as we've seen over the course of the past couple of weeks, unless things are going absolutely perfectly, that's not the offense that you're seeing. In the previous weeks, you saw a couple of wins and a couple of games that were driven by the run game. Over 220 plus yards up against the Cincinnati Bengals, 4 touchdowns by Taysom Hill up against the Seattle Seahawks, 3 touchdowns by Alvin Kamara against the Las Vegas Raiders. And outside of that, what have you seen? You've seen an offense that struggles to stay on the field, that can't convert third downs, that's not able to get a run game going, and that's still turning the ball over. This team is still at the bottom of the NFL in both the most turnovers and the largest turnover differential. So all the things that were supposed to lead to the decision of starting Andy Dalton over Jameis Winston, they haven't come to fruition, have they? And as far as I'm concerned, last week was everything you needed to know. Maybe this week was enough. Now, we don't know if Jameis Winston is going to be able to come in and be the guy moving forward for the rest of the season. As you saw, for those of you that have seen it, the great piece over at NewOrleans.football, it's where he discusses that he's still recovering from his injury. He is indeed still hurt, although he feels like if he's called upon, he can go out there and play. But are you going to be able to help to turn this team around when they are one win away from the mark that they set last year, where they started 50 plus different starters, where they had, or 50 plus different players, where they had, 4 different quarterbacks, 3 different kickers, none of which being the kicker that they intended to start the season with. You're one loss away from matching that mark, the mark that the Saints were supposed to see as their floor coming into this season. Is this team, the one that we just watched here in Pittsburgh, you can see a beautiful AccuShore Stadium right behind me if you're watching on YouTube. Does this team have what it takes to go on a run to close out the season? It's hard to say yes, isn't it? I mean, am I crazy? It's hard to say yes when you ask that question. And so at this point, what's left? What are you pushing for? What do you have left to protect yourself from? You got to try everything. Throw the kitchen sink at this thing if you have to. So eventually these types of things have to get ironed out. So I am here yet again. I'm once again asking you to join me in my sort of latest narrative, which has been one around Andy Dalton is not the answer. And it's okay. It's okay if you're not, if you're not there, and if you want to continue to see Andy Dalton play quarterback, I completely understand. That's fine. I'm sure you have your reasons. I just don't have any reason for that any longer. I think the Saints something needs to change, and they need a drastic shift, and they need it quickly. Now, you can make that drastic shift at quarterback. You can do that very easily. You can also make that drastic shift at head coach, but you're not going to do that in the middle of a head coach's first season. That's a stain on the organization, as we've discussed. But what about the relationship between the New Orleans Saints and Dennis Allen moving forward? Dennis Allen said something in his press conference today, his post-game presser, that I thought was particularly interesting, that I thought really shines a light on where this New Orleans Saints team is versus where they could be. I'll tell you what that is as we continue on with this live postcast episode of Locked On Saints. Before we get to that, though, today's episode is brought to you by, you see the smile on my face right now? Total Wines and More. Listen, I'm a wine guy, all right? I'm a wine guy, but I'm also a bourbon guy. And so I love Total Wines and More. We have one in New Orleans as well as some of the other spots that you can go to, but I'm a Total Wine and More guy. And the reason why is because you're able to find exactly what it is that you're looking for very quickly. They have a wide assortment, even like whiskeys and bourbons that I absolutely love, like Uncle Nearest, for instance. Total Wines and More carries them, and sometimes that's hard to find. I've been seeing it more and more, but Total Wines and More was always my go-to spot in order to find my Uncle Nearest. So this holiday, find what you love at Total Wine and More. With so many different great bottles to choose from, it's easy to find the single bourbon barrel or whatever perfect gift for somebody that you're looking for over at Total Wines and More, along with help from a friendly guide, even if you need it. And with all the confidence of knowing that you found something special at the lowest price. So find what you love and love what you find by heading over to Total Wines and More. And just so you know, they've also got curbside pickup and delivery available in most areas. Visit TotalWine.com to learn more. Spirits not sold in Virginia and North Carolina. Drink responsibly, and hey, be 21. Today's episode is also brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. If you're like me and you took more for Alvin Kamara's rushing numbers, you're disappointed because Alvin Kamara only carried the ball 8 times in this game, ran for just 26 yards, averages 3.3 yards per carry on the ground. Pittsburgh Steelers did a great job against the run game, and of course the Saints offensive line was injured. We're going to be talking about that here in a little bit as well. But Prize Picks is still my favorite place to go, and I'm just probably not going to do this anymore with with Saints players. I'm going to go and rest on the laurels of Justin Jefferson's and Josh Allen's and Patrick Mahomes, because all you have to do basically is pick 2 to 5 players, choose whether or not they're going to come at more or less than their Prize Picks projection. You get those right, you can get up to 10 times your entry back, so you want to go and check them out. You'd also get a 100% deposit match up to $100 if you're a first-time user. All you have to do is use the promo code Locked On. That means you put that promo code in, you put down $100, they'll match $100. You put down $50, they'll match $50. So go and check them out. Don't forget that promo code Locked On over at PrizePicks.com or on the PrizePicks app today to start playing daily fantasy sports. All right, family. I'm taking the energy out of this one. I'm not low on energy. I'm not gonna do all that, but what are you excited for when it comes to this New Orleans Saints team? And should I be rubbing it in your face that oh, look how much, look at all the energy and all this stuff. But that's what this team needs, right? The way that I sound right now kind of feels like how the New Orleans Saints fans are across, wherever you are. We know this is a worldwide fan base that just hasn't seen the production, hasn't really seen the success that was sort of promised and that was expected with this New Orleans Saints roster and all the offseason things like we discussed before. And one of those big offseason moves was, of course, the move to stay within the building They talked to Doug Peterson. They talked to Mike McDaniel. They talked to Eric Bieniemy. They talked to several different candidates at head coach, and then they eventually settle on going with the guy that we all kind of knew was going to be the choice in Dennis Allen, right? Defensive coordinator. He was the interim head coach when Sean Payton was out with COVID during that 9-0 shutout of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He had the locker room. He had the players. He had the relationship. He had the relationship with the organization. Everybody loved him. And it wasn't like it was a roster that was completely depleted. It wasn't like it was a losing team or anything like that. So you kind of went, oh, okay, yeah, the 8-28 start over in Oakland at that time for the Raiders maybe doesn't apply because this is probably the best roster that Dennis Allen had in comparison to those 2 seasons and a few games. Well, things look oddly similar here in New Orleans, or well, here in Pittsburgh, but for the New Orleans Saints than they did with Dennis Allen when he was the head coach of the Oakland Raiders. Energy feels low. Players feel it sort of feels like the players are being charged with the responsibility of everything. And that was one of the things that I thought was really interesting when I listened to, when we stood there and we did Dennis Allen's post-game presser, is that he said, the only way to fight through this is to fight. And this is a time that we lean on veteran guys in the locker room. They have to pull us out from this. And I thought that was really interesting because for me, in my perspective, and maybe I'm wrong, right? Like there's a 100% chance that I might be wrong here. But even in my anonymous conversations, that doesn't feel like that was maybe the right choice of words, right? It's kind of your responsibility to pull them up and pull them out of this. You're the leader of the team. You're the face of the organization when it comes to being the head coach. That's kind of your responsibility. So to kind of pass the buck over to the veteran players, I understand the importance of the veteran players. You got guys with C's in their chest for a reason, right? And we just watched in Houston as the C got stripped from Brandon Cooks right before a game, right? So we know the impact of veteran players, the impact of veteran leadership, especially guys who have been in this kind of situation before, right? Like Cam Jordan was here in 2014, 15, and 16 when this team struggled. And then was also here back in 2017 when, they started off struggling early on in the season. Jarvis Landry's been with some bad teams in his career as well. The same thing for Tyrann Mathieu. I mean, geez, he was in Houston for a little while, right? So I get the idea and the value of veteran players and what they do to elevate a roster and elevate the attitudes of the players around them. But these young guys are from schools like Ohio State and Tennessee. They're winning programs, right? So it's not out of the ordinary to kind of see a team be willing to rally around one another. That's fine, but you need sort of that push from the head coach as well. And I'll tell you, one of the things that I think this team misses a lot is fire. It's charge, it's energy juice, whatever it is that you want to call it, right? Whatever label you want to put on it from the head coach. Sean Payton would usually be arguing and yelling at people on the sideline for screwing up and false starts and all these other things. We're seeing false start after false start after false start, penalty after penalty after penalty on a majority undisciplined team. And I should say, just because it's worth noting, yes, the Saints did deal with injuries on their offensive line. They didn't, they had Lewis Kidd making his first career start. Josh Andrews was elevated from the practice squad to start at center with Eric McCoy and Andrus Peat out. At some point during the game, early on in the game, actually, James Hurst ended up getting hurt, or rather early on in the second half, James Hurst ended up getting hurt, and then Landon Turner was starting at outside, or Landon Young, rather, was starting at outside left tackle. I get it. I 100% understand it. And sometimes the inexperience, right, leads to a discomfort with cadence, leads to a misunderstanding of their role. And should they be downfield? Should they be all of these other things? I get all of that. And I don't want to discredit any of that. But also, I don't want to give everything to that, because this is also a team that still said on 3rd and 1, we're going to run right behind that interior offensive line. That said on a 4th down, we're going to run right behind this interior offensive line. So if you're going to give them the credit and the benefit of the doubt to say, yeah, we're going to put this drive in the hands of that injured interior, but then also then I'm not going to feel very comfortable turning around and saying, well, the penalties are on the younger guys because they're inexperienced and it's okay. It's not. And at a certain point, you wonder, where's the fire from Dennis Allen to be down the throats of these guys, to be, in the face of these guys when they do make mistakes and make them not want to make mistakes anymore. I'm not talking about leading with fear, but there is a balance that can be struck. And we see it with guys like Mike Tomlin. Like you think about a couple of years ago when Mike Tomlin was leading a team, the Pittsburgh Steelers, that was losing early on in the team, that looked unmotivated, that probably looked unmotivated to a way that we can't say about this New Orleans Saints team, because you've got guys that are playing 95% of their snaps throughout this game, like Cam Jordan, with one eye closed, right? Like these guys are working their tails off out on the field. So, but you have a guy like Mike Tomlin who saw their team start off the season poorly, and then what did he do? He changed everything about practice, right? Like you have to have your toe on the line right at this time or you're getting fined. And there was sort of a militant approach, or a more militant approach, to the way that practice then looked. And then what happened? That team, what did they do? They rattled off 7 straight wins. They won 2 playoff games, and then the next season they started with like a fire under their tails. And why? Because the head coach led the team in that direction. Where is Dennis Allen, and why isn't he doing something similar? Is it because he feels like he can pass that off to the veteran guys, and that's just what this team was expected to do from the very beginning? Sure, but hey, eventually you got to improvise. What do you have to lose here? It's getting harder and harder and harder to say, yeah, it makes sense that Dennis Allen's going to be the head coach in 2023. It's getting harder and harder to make that argument, if I'm being 100% honest. In moments like this, where you don't see that fire, you don't see that charge, you don't see that juice, you don't see that energy coming from the head coaching spot, and instead you see him actively passing the buck to the veteran players on the roster, the players, what argument do you have left at that point? So I don't know. Maybe this is just me. And like I said, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm not seeing this correctly. Maybe that should be the responsibility of the players, not the responsibility of the head coach. But we have seen head coaches step up. We've seen Sean Payton do it. We've seen Mike Tomlin do it. We've seen Bill Belichick do it. We've seen the best coaches in the NFL step up and say, this is no longer acceptable, whether it be quality of play, whether it be lack of discipline, whether it be penalties, whether it be turnovers, whatever it is, or whether it's just losing games, which is what the New Orleans Saints are doing right now at a clip of 70% over the course of their first 10 games on the season. It just feels like the calm, cool, collected approach, the chummy approach, isn't one that's going to work. So if you feel like there are things that need to be fixed in terms of fundamentals, make the fundamentals get fixed. If you feel like there are things that need to get fixed in terms of discipline, find the discipline, create the discipline. And I just don't feel like we are seeing that right now. Ramiro Gutierrez wants me to go over possible candidates in the front office to choose from if the Saints move on from Dennis Allen. Ramiro, what I will promise you is that I will absolutely go over that toward the end of the season. But for right now, I'm going to stay focused on the games, continue to get you ready for the games that are up ahead. But we will start to intertwine some of that conversation. So what I will promise you is that we will have that conversation. We will also have more conversations about what the Saints can do in the draft. That includes also looking at potential first-round picks if they do trade the rights to Sean Payton and get a first-round pick back. Like, we won't leave that out. We will 100% get to that stuff. But I got to tell you, right now, what I'm looking at is a New Orleans Saints team whose players are working their tails off and trying to find a way to get back into their winning ways. Can they do it? It's getting harder and harder. And as you see that I have written right over here, if you're watching over on the YouTube side, it seems like the light is just dimming, right? The Saints are running out of time, and it's hard to see how they can get things corrected. But if they can, you have to credit the players at this point. All right, make sure you come back a little bit later. We're going to have a longer episode for our standard Monday episode to break down this entire game and take a look at where things went wrong, where things went right, the few bright spots that the Saints did have, and how they end up, moving forward from this. And I have some really nice observations, too, from the locker room that I think should mean a lot to you as a New Orleans Saints fan, so don't miss any of that. I appreciate y'all, as always, for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to also go and check out Locked On Sports today so you can get everything you need to know from around the world of sports in about 22 minutes. Don't miss that. And, of course, we'll see you here tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Saints. Appreciate you, as always, making it part of your day, part of your routine. And, of course, for always saying yes to me and the show. Actually, I'm going to pause for just a second. I'm going to say this. It means a lot to me that, this team has 7 losses, and we've got nearly 200 people watching live, and we still have thousands and thousands and thousands of people that are listening to the show, watching the show every day. So shout out to you. Thank you so much for continuing to support the show. I really, really appreciate it. As always, if you see me, say hi. Love seeing folks. Shout out to Nick Worsta, and a couple of other folks that I got to see out here in Pittsburgh this weekend. We're back with you here tomorrow. As always, if you need anything else in between these episodes on your New Orleans Saints, make sure you follow along on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.